My wife walked out on me for 3 months, and now she's begging to come back. But I don't want her anymore. 7 years ago, I married Emily, the woman I once thought was my soulmate. Back then, I truly believed I was the luckiest man alive. We had been together for 2 years, and everything felt perfect. Emily was full of life, always seeking adventure, and her energy was contagious. We laughed constantly, shared big dreams, and talked about our future like it was something we could already hold in our hands. The first few months of marriage felt like a never-ending honeymoon. We were newlyweds, caught up in the magic of building a life together. Every day was full of possibilities, and Emily was everything I had ever wanted in a partner. Just being with her made me feel unstoppable. I was deeply in love and convinced that I was living the life I had always dreamed of. But then, things started to shift. I can't pinpoint exactly when it began, but about 6 months into our marriage, Emily started withdrawing. The vibrant, joyful woman I had fallen in love with seemed to fade away. At first, I assumed it was just a rough patch. Everyone goes through ups and downs, right? But the downward spiral didn't stop. She became distant, moody, and spent more time in bed than anywhere else. At first, I tried to brush it off. I told myself it was just an adjustment period, that she'd snap out of it soon enough. Maybe she was struggling with something she wasn't ready to share. So I gave her space, hoping things would work themselves out. But instead of improving, things got worse. Emily stopped showing any interest in intimacy. She barely spoke about what was on her mind, and when I asked, she dismissed me with a vague excuse. She was tired. She wasn't feeling well. But I could see it in her eyes. Something deeper was weighing her down. Eventually, I convinced her to see a doctor. After multiple appointments and referrals, she was diagnosed with depression. At the time, I didn't fully understand what that meant. Mental health wasn't something I had ever dealt with personally. I assumed depression was just a prolonged bad mood, something people could push through if they tried hard enough. But this was different. Determined to support her, I took on everything. I told Emily not to worry about housework. I would handle it. I wanted her to focus on getting better, to work through things with her therapist. I believed that if I stayed patient, if I carried the load for both of us, we'd make it through. It wasn't easy. I was already working full-time, putting in 40-hour weeks, only to come home to a house in complete disarray, dishes stacked in the sink, clothes everywhere, the bed perpetually unmade. Emily barely left the bedroom. She didn't contribute to anything. Still, I told myself it was temporary, that she would get better. But weeks turned into months, and months stretched into years. Emily remained stuck in her depression, and I felt like I was drowning in frustration. I couldn't even remember the last time we had been intimate. Date nights were a thing of the past. No more cuddling on the couch. No more spontaneous affection. We were like strangers living under the same roof. I wasn't her husband anymore. I was her caretaker. I worked, cooked, cleaned, and at the end of the day, all I got in return were complaints. Emily was unhappy with her life, her body, the house, the world. I tried to be understanding, but over time, resentment started creeping in. Friends would invite me out for drinks, but I could never go. Emily would call me nonstop, saying she was scared or needed me home. I had no social life, no way to relieve my own stress. I felt trapped in a life that I hadn't signed up for. Then, 4 months ago, everything changed again. Emily started seeing a new therapist, and 3 months ago, she came home with a shocking revelation. Her therapist suggested that I might be the reason for her depression. After everything I had done, all the sacrifices I had made, I was now being blamed for her unhappiness. It felt like a punch to the gut. Emily told me she needed time away from me, that she had to figure things out on her own. She said she needed space to heal. I was devastated. After years of standing by her through her lowest moments, she was now telling me that I was the problem. For the next month, I spiraled. I called her constantly, begged her to come back, apologized for things I wasn't even sure I had done wrong. I felt lost, empty. At one point, I even considered ending it all. My life felt meaningless without her. But then it hit me. My life had felt meaningless with her, too. As time passed, I started feeling something I hadn't expected: relief. For the first time in years, the house was peaceful. I could come home and actually relax. I started focusing on myself again. Slowly, I rediscovered the things I had given up. I went to the gym, read books, spent time with friends. It was like I was finally waking up from a long, exhausting dream. And that's when I realized I had been miserable for years. I had spent so much time caring for Emily that I had completely neglected myself. I wasn't happy, and I hadn't been happy in a long time. I didn't love her anymore, not the way I once had. I felt like I had wasted my best years on someone who didn't appreciate it, and I refused to go back to that life. Then, out of the blue, Emily called. She was sobbing, telling me she had made a huge mistake. She admitted she had taken her therapist's words too seriously, and now realized how much she loved me. She begged me to take her back. For a moment, I almost said yes. The old me, the one who had once been completely devoted to her, wanted to forgive her, to let her come home. But then I thought about everything I had been through, everything I had sacrificed. I thought about how, for the first time in years, I was finally starting to feel like myself again. So I told her no. I told her I was done. I told her I had wasted enough time on a relationship that had drained me, and that I was filing for divorce. After I hung up, I cried. I cried for the life I had lost, for the love I had once felt, for the years I would never get back. But underneath that sadness, there was something else: freedom. The hardest part wasn't saying no to Emily. It was dealing with everyone else's reactions. My family and friends told me I was making a mistake. They said I owed it to her to give her another chance, that marriage isn't supposed to be easy, and that I should fight for her. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had already fought. For years. And I was done fighting for someone who never fought for me. I had already given so much. I had fought for years, sacrificed my happiness, my peace of mind. And what had I gotten in return? Nothing but heartache. Was I really supposed to keep living like this just because marriage was supposed to be for better or worse? Doubt crept in. Was I abandoning her when she needed me most? Did this make me the bad guy for walking away from someone struggling with depression? But then I'd remind myself, hadn't I been living in misery for so long? Didn't I deserve to be happy too? No, I couldn't go back to that life. I refused. Still, despite my decision to leave, I knew I needed closure. I couldn't just end things without one final conversation. So, I invited Emily over to talk. It was one of the hardest conversations I've ever had: awkward, raw, emotional. Years of bottled up frustration spilled out between us. I told her how exhausted I was, how I had carried our entire marriage on my back. I admitted that I didn't recognize her anymore, that she wasn't the same person I had married. And I told her the truth: I had felt more alive in the last few months than I had in years. Emily sat quietly at first, taking it all in. Then, she finally spoke. She admitted she had known I was unhappy. She apologized for not being the partner I deserved. She confessed that the guilt of watching me work so hard while she did nothing had eaten away at her. She admitted she had taken me for granted. For hours we talked, and for the first time in years, I saw glimpses of the woman I had fallen in love with. There was no blame, no excuses, just accountability. And it made me wonder, was there still a chance to salvage something from the wreckage of our marriage? In the end, I told her I would give her one last chance, but under strict conditions. She had to get a part-time job. She had to help around the house. She had to come to the gym with me, go back to therapy, and take her medication. No more excuses. We would go to couples counseling and commit to regular date nights. If she could stick to these conditions for several months, maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild. To my surprise, she agreed. It's been 2 days since that conversation, and Emily has already started making an effort. She's helping out at her parents' house, looking for jobs. I'm cautiously optimistic, but I know there's a long road ahead. Part of me wonders if I'm a fool for giving her another chance. But another part of me hopes, just hopes, that maybe we can find our way back to each other. The days after our talk felt surreal. The house was so quiet, so peaceful, and I had this strange sense of control over my own life again. It was like living in a suspended reality, unsure if Emily would truly follow through or if I had just set myself up for more disappointment. To her credit, she did start working on the things we talked about. She got a job at a local cafe waiting tables. It wasn't much, but it was something. She looked more put together when she left the house, wasn't spending every hour in bed. It was like watching someone relearn how to live. But that didn't mean things were easy, not by a long shot. We started going to the gym together 3 times a week. I've always been the type to push myself, lifting heavy, pushing through the burn, feeling that rush of accomplishment. Emily, though, she struggled. Watching her half-heartedly use the machines, giving up halfway through a set, sweat dripping down her face as she muttered, "I can't." It was frustrating. I wanted to be supportive, but I felt like I was walking a fine line. If I pushed too hard, I might push her away. But if I didn't push at all, was she really going to change? Slowly, resentment started creeping back in. She was doing the bare minimum, just enough to meet my conditions, but not enough to really prove she was invested. Every time she quit halfway through a workout, every time I came home to find her lying on the couch, the frustration built like a smoldering fire. I needed to see more from her. I needed to feel like she actually wanted this, not like I was dragging her along by force. About a month into this new arrangement, I started noticing a shift. It was subtle at first, small things. She started calling out of work, saying she didn't feel well. She skipped gym sessions, claiming she was too tired. I wanted to be understanding. I knew recovery wasn't a straight path, that setbacks were inevitable. But deep down, I was furious. I had laid out clear expectations, and already, it felt like she was slipping back into old patterns. Then, one night, I came home from a particularly rough day at work to find the house exactly as I had left it. Dishes piled up in the sink. Laundry still sitting in baskets. The bed unmade. And Emily, curled up on the couch, staring at the TV, a half-empty bag of chips beside her. She hadn't even started dinner. Something inside me snapped. I didn't say anything at first. I just walked past her into the kitchen and started cleaning. The clatter of dishes echoed through the quiet house. She glanced over at me, her eyes dull with exhaustion. "Sorry," she mumbled. "I just didn't feel up to it today." As if that was supposed to excuse everything. My hands trembled as I turned to her, my voice low but laced with barely contained anger. "I can't keep doing this, Emily," I said, my throat tightening. "I can't be the only one putting in effort." She looked down at her hands, her face flushing with guilt. "I'm trying. I really am." But it didn't feel like enough. It hadn't felt like enough for a long time. Our couples counseling sessions felt like walking through a minefield. Every appointment was an emotional roller coaster, digging up years of resentment and pain. Dr. Harris, our therapist, was patient but firm. She forced us to confront the cracks in our marriage that we had ignored for so long. And as we sat there, dissecting the mess we had become, I started to wonder, was there even anything left to fix? Dr. Harris didn't hold back during our counseling sessions. She forced us to confront the hard truths, the unmet expectations, and the toll Emily's depression had taken on both of us. It was uncomfortable, painful even, but necessary. One day, she turned to me and asked point blank, "How long do you think you can continue in this marriage if things don't change?" The bluntness of the question caught me off guard. I glanced at Emily, who looked terrified, sadness written all over her face. I didn't want to hurt her, but I also couldn't lie. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice quiet but firm. "I've already given so much, and I don't know how much more I have left in me." Emily's face crumpled, and she started to cry, softly at first, then in deep, gut-wrenching sobs. I felt a pang of guilt twist in my chest, but it wasn't enough to change how I felt. I was emotionally drained, mentally exhausted, and physically worn down. The hardest part was that I still cared about her. I didn't want her to be in pain, but I also couldn't ignore my own suffering anymore. As I started going out with friends again, I realized just how much I had missed. They had moved on with their lives, getting married, having kids, advancing in their careers, while I had been stuck in limbo, trapped in a house full of broken promises. I envied them, not just for the stability in their lives, but for the freedom they had. And then, there were the women. I wasn't looking for anything. I was still committed to giving Emily her chance, to seeing if we could rebuild, but that didn't stop other women from noticing me. At the gym, at the grocery store, even at bars, there was always someone willing to flirt, to hold eye contact just a second too long. It felt good. After years of feeling invisible in my own home, being seen again was refreshing. One night, after hanging out with friends, a woman at a bar struck up a conversation with me. She was easy to talk to, funny, engaging. We spent an hour chatting about life, work, random things. There were no expectations, no pressure, just two people talking. But as the conversation flowed, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a spark. She leaned in slightly, her hand brushing against mine, and in that moment, I realized just how far my heart had drifted from Emily. I didn't act on it. I made an excuse, said goodnight, and left the bar with a strange mix of guilt and relief. But the temptation had been there, and I couldn't ignore what that meant. It was a sign that, deep down, I was already done with my marriage. About 2 months into our new arrangement, Emily hit a wall. At first, she had been making an effort, going to work, keeping up with her responsibilities. But then, something shifted. One night, she came home from her job, walked into the living room, and collapsed onto the floor in tears. Her body shook with sobs, her entire frame trembling. I stood there, unsure of what to do. "What's wrong?" I asked, kneeling beside her. "I can't do it," she choked out. "I'm trying so hard, but I'm failing. I'm failing at everything." I wanted to comfort her. I wanted to tell her she wasn't failing, that we could figure this out together. But I couldn't. I was tired of being the one to always pick up the pieces. I had my own emotional scars from this relationship, and I didn't know how to keep supporting her while also protecting myself. So, I just sat there, silent, and that silence said everything. This was what our marriage had become. One person always in crisis, the other barely holding on. It wasn't sustainable, and I knew it. One evening, after another exhausting counseling session, I found myself driving aimlessly. I didn't want to go home. The thought of walking through that door, of facing the same conversations, the same tears, the same emotional exhaustion, it was too much. I pulled over by a lake and just sat there, staring out at the water. My mind raced. I had tried so hard to make this marriage work. I had given everything I had. But the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. No matter how much effort we both put in, we were fundamentally broken. I didn't love Emily the way I used to. And deep down, I knew I never would again. That night, when I finally walked through our front door, I felt an eerie sense of calm. I found Emily sitting on the couch, watching TV. She glanced up at me with tired eyes, unaware that everything was about to change. I sat down across from her, took a deep breath, and spoke the words I had been avoiding for so long. I can't do this anymore. Her eyes widened. What do you mean? I mean I'm done, I said, my voice steady. We've tried. We've both tried. But it's not working. And I don't think it ever will. Tears welled up in her eyes. She started crying, again. But for the first time, I didn't feel the guilt I used to. I felt sad, yes. But that sadness was mixed with acceptance. I wasn't abandoning her. I was saving myself. That night, we slept in separate rooms. The silence between us was deafening. But it was also liberating. I had made my decision. And for the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. The divorce process was messy, as these things often are. Emily didn't take it well at first, but eventually, she came to accept that this was the best thing for both of us. We split our belongings, sold the house, and went our separate ways. Even though I knew it was the right decision, I still felt the weight of failure. I had wanted so badly for things to work. But in the end, love wasn't enough to fix what was broken. Now, months after the divorce has been finalized, I'm still figuring out who I am without Emily. Living alone after all these years feels strange. The silence can be comforting, but sometimes it's haunting. I miss parts of our life together, the good moments, the laughter we once shared. But I don't miss the pain. I don't miss the exhaustion. And I don't miss the feeling of being trapped. For the first time in a long time, I am free. And that's something I will never take for granted again.